Hello and welcome to a quick video on the topic of cannabis. Real quickly, I just wanted to say we've decided to send out a video to educators and parents that we've worked with or hope to work with about cannabis because we have found that during the 2022-2023 school year, this is the most talked about substance. Questions from parents, questions from teachers, questions from students. And so we're making this quick video for you to watch and hopefully give you some information and tools to continue this really important conversation with young people today in your world that you support. So my name is Greeley. I'm the founder of Prevention Ed. Prevention Ed is a global substance use prevention organization that provides alcohol and other drug education to students, parents, and educators around the world. I've been doing this work now for over a decade. I come at it from the perspective of as a licensed clinical social worker, as well as a highly trained prevention specialist, as well as an individual in long-term healthy recovery from alcohol or the drug addiction. So I'm going to jump right in. Let's get started. Cannabis, like I said, the most talked about substance this year. And so the goal of our presentation today is to arm you, right, an adult that supports young people in your community with the information you need to talk about this substance in a way that informs young people of the risk associated with the drug. So we're experiencing a global cultural shift on the substance, right? Thailand just recently legalized cannabis. Washington, D.C., Germany, Czech Republic is on its way. Ukraine is trying to speed up the legalization of cannabis. So what I think is important to recognize is that in 2023, when we talk about cannabis, the legal landscape is constantly evolving, constantly changing, and the needle is constantly moving on this topic. So if any of you are adults that have tried to talk about this substance with young people in your lives, right? If it feels overwhelming or intimidating, I get it, right? Because as an expert myself, I'm constantly treading water to keep up with this. So, right, what do we need to know? Okay, so from the public health perspective, when it comes to cannabis, something we need to be very aware of as educators and adults is that when perception of risk goes down, what we tend to see is use go up, right? And so when it comes to cannabis specifically, let's talk about some of the things that have lowered the perception of risk associated with this drug, right? Adult and medical legalization, increase youth and adult use. Now, it hasn't blown up that everyone is using cannabis, but we have seen a slight increase over the past decade of cannabis among youth and adults. Vaping technology, right? The idea that a lot of misinformation young people have around vaping, the potential to get away with it easily, it's less likely to smell like cannabis, all of that. Edibles, something to eat rather than smoke, right? We know we've associated smoking with as a risk. And then misinformation. So much misinformation out there about this substance, right? So when we look at all of these factors, right, what we're fighting against for every one, fact that talks about the risk associated with cannabis for young people today, there are 50 pieces of misinformation that might be promoting the use or saying like, hey, it's medical, or hey, it's all natural, or hey, this isn't that risky. It's just weed. And what I want to do is arm y'all with the information you need to know, like, actually, this drug has evolved to be quite a different substance than people perceive it to be, right? So let's talk about that, right? When perception of risk goes down, use goes up. So 48% of youth believe that there's no risk to a slight risk associated with monthly cannabis use, right? I'm not going to read all of these numbers off the screen, but they're right there for you, and there's the citation as well. So again, when it comes to alcohol or the drugs, cannabis is often perceived as a less risky substance. The big picture, right? So in the past year, right, we have seen past month and daily use of cannabis reach its all-time highest levels ever since 1988. So that's the cannabis-specific news when we look at alcohol or other drug trends. The good news, all other illicit substances, cannabis removed, have been on the decline for the past 46 years, right? So here's our goal, right? Our goal today, and with you watching this video, is to take what the actual risks are associated with this substance and even out that perception of risk. So bring young people and yourselves, maybe even what your perception of risk is with cannabis up to the actual risk. So we can make sure that when we're in conversation with young people, like I said, we're giving them the information that they need to make a healthy, informed choice for themselves moving forward with their relationship to this substance. Okay, we want that balance, right? All right, so this is a more American-focused numbers, right? But I would say the United States, based on all of the countries that I've worked in, has higher rates of cannabis use than anywhere else in the world among youth. So in 2022, this is from Monitoring the Future. Monitoring the Future is the gold standard that survey based out of the University of Michigan that measures alcohol and other drug use among 8th, 10th, and 12th graders for year 9s, year 11s, and year 13s, right? Again, not going to read it off to you, but that gives you an idea of when we're looking at pathological use, right? What those numbers actually are. What that does say, and I think is really important to highlight, right, for any of you that are, familiar with the social norms approach to prevention, is that the majority of young people are making healthy choices and not engaging in use of cannabis. All right, so what we're going to talk about really today is the THC, those 3 letters right there, right? The cannabis plant has 500 chemicals in it total, 100 cannabinoids. You've probably heard THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. That is the psychoactive ingredient that gets you high. And then you've probably heard CBD, which is the ingredient in cannabis that potentially has medical properties. Now, CBD, you cannot get high. I could be sitting in a CBD bubble bath, smoking a CBD vape, drinking a CBD soda, and I would not feel anything. Okay? It's the THC that we're focused on for the purposes of our conversation today. So here's one thing that a lot of people don't know. Cannabis, right? When I go into a classroom, when we're presenting our curriculum, we're going to talk about the different classifications of substances, right? That the 3 are depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. Now, what's very interesting about cannabis is one of those substances that it falls into all 3 categories, right? So there's the depressant strain of cannabis, which is known as indica. There's the stimulant strain of cannabis, which is known as sativa. And then if you start to hallucinate from cannabis, you have taken too much. You have overdosed, right? And so a lot of young people, their eyes get really wide when I say you can overdose on cannabis. And I need to define the word overdose, right? Overdose does not equal, fatality. Overdose means you took over the recommended dosage. And we're actually seeing more of that in the past couple years than we've ever seen before because of the potency rates, which I'll get to in a second. But real quickly, right? When you're looking at the depressants, right? This depressant strain of cannabis, it's called indica. And so you can remember that indica is the depressant strain of cannabis because if you use indica, you go into the couch, all right? That's the depressant strain. If you use sativa, it's a stimulant. And then, like I said, if you start hallucinating from cannabis, you've taken too much. So oftentimes, if young people have the perception, okay, cannabis is a depressant, majority of individuals just think cannabis is a depressant, it's going to help me with my anxiety. It's going to bring me down. But if they get the sativa strain and they're a highly anxious or anxious individual, they're going to have that effect where they're going to feel their heart beating faster, start to sweat, tight chest, all of that, right? So important to just classify. Okay, so this is what I want people to understand. This is what I want educators and adults to understand, how this substance has evolved, right? Like I said earlier, I'm an individual in long-term healthy recovery from alcohol and other drug addiction. I graduated in high school in 2007. So for me, right, the only cannabis that I was really familiar with was that cannabis flower there, right? And so, when I was in high school, that went up to 13% THC. Today, we have many different variations. We have the flower, we have the edibles, which again, if we look at that brownie, that's a little bit outdated if you're in the States or you're in a state or a country where cannabis is legal and they sell edibles. We have edible Sour Patch Kids, edible lollipops, edible gummy bears. The number one medium for young people to start using cannabis through now is vaping, so THC oil. And then this earwax looking stuff in the bottom right corner, that's known as cannabis concentrates. So, why is this important, right? Um, well, let's talk about the evolution. Let's talk about how this drug has gotten stronger, right? THC is that psychoactive ingredient that gets you high. And if we're going back in time and we're looking at the 60s and 70s, right? The 60s and 70s, free love, the hippie movement, Woodstock, right? There was a cannabis culture. There's a cannabis culture, but it was actually terrible cannabis, right? 1% THC. We get to the 80s and 90s. Now, this is the age of a lot of parents, right, of our students today. 3% THC. And that's important, right? Because if you have a high schooler today and maybe a parent has used cannabis when they were in, high school in the 80s and 90s, their perception might be like, oh, it's not that bad, right? It's not that strong. It's totally okay. I'm not worried about it. The average THC level today in the cannabis flower is from 16 to 19% THC. The highest potency in the flower can be up between 30 to 35%, right? And then cannabis concentrates, again, this earwax looking stuff, can be up to 99% THC, right? So you have to be asking yourself, right? We know that alcohol and other drug use is different for an individual with an underdeveloped brain than an adult who has a fully formed brain, right? We know and we have research about the impact of cannabis on the developing brain, but that was in 2014. And I'll get to that in a second because that's really important. What is 30 to 35% cannabis THC what is weed that is about between 30 to 35% potent do to the developing brain? We're just starting to figure this out, right? So how did this happen? If you look at this is a graph from 1995 to 2014 that takes a look at the potency of the substance. And then 2014, boom, you'll see it right here. 2014 was the year that Colorado legalized adult use of cannabis. And what we see is a boom in the potency of the drug. Why? All of a sudden, it has become a billion-dollar industry. And what measures the quality of their product? How strong it is, right? So all of a sudden, right, cannabis is a billion-dollar industry right up there with big tobacco and big alcohol, right? And so we see this skyrocketing THC rates. Okay. So, as a clinician, right, this just came out, last July. And before that, similarly to vaping vaping nicotine rather, I go into the classroom. I never lie to students. I never lie to adults, right? We only use, the facts and, what's the most up-to-date research about what actually the health risks are associated with these substances. Previously with vaping, right, I tell students like, hey, we don't know what the long-term health consequences are of vaping nicotine, right? But we can make an inference, right? That's, based on what we've already read and what our research has already come out, that it's not going to be, improving the quality of your health, right? I always tell young people when it comes to vaping, our lungs are meant to inhale anything but clean, fresh air. Anyways, back to this. July 2022, the Lancet Psychiatry Journal publishes this article, right? That higher potency cannabis has caused an increase in addiction rates and an increased negative consequence or impact on mental health, right? We've seen a 76% increase of people entering into treatment for higher potency cannabis. And we've seen individuals that use higher potency products more likely to experience psychotic disorders later on in life, as schizophrenia, right? So we're finally 9 years post adult legalization in Colorado, adult use legalization. We're seeing the impact. And so this is important. We talk about this with parents. Again, we talk about this with staff, and I talk about this with students. Hey, there is a difference between the cannabis flower, THC oil, a daily user. But again, if your perception is, oh, it's just weed, it's not a big deal. Actually, cannabis is now the leading substance for individuals under 18 entering into treatment in the United States. Okay, real quickly, and we're going to wrap it up. think it's important to talk about eating versus inhaling. Okay, so when I inhale something, right, I take a deep breath in, goes into my lungs, goes from my lungs to my bloodstream, goes my bloodstream to my brain. That takes about 5 minutes. Okay, when cannabis is eaten, it often takes about 30 to 90 minutes. It needs to be eaten, needs to go down my esophagus, into my stomach, go from my stomach into my small intestines, into my bloodstream, into my brain, right? So that takes up to 30 to 90 minutes. So not just young people, not just teenagers make this mistake. A lot of individuals don't understand that. And this is one of the reasons, including with the higher potency, that we're seeing a lot of people enter into emergency departments for a cannabis overdose, right? What happens? They might be familiar with using the substance through inhaling it, through a vape or smoking it, and taking 5 minutes. They break off a piece of an edible, not really sure how much they're actually eating in milligrams. They eat it, 20 minutes goes by, they go, oh, I don't feel anything. They eat another one, and then boom, they feel it. And it's likely that it could be an uncomfortable experience. So here's an exercise I do. Here's an exercise I do in the classroom with students. I say, hey, this is a chocolate bar. This is an edible, right? You can walk into the Washington State to a dispensary, and you can buy this chocolate bar, and it's 100 milligrams of THC, right? Now, let me just say, most individuals don't know that 5 milligrams is the serving size of an edible, right? We've known now for a long time that 12 ounces of beer equals 5 ounces of wine equals 1.5 ounces of liquor, right? And I do convert that to the metric system when I am abroad. But for the purposes of our video today in this chocolate bar, I said, okay, so how much of this chocolate bar are you going to eat, or should somebody eat, right? Again, I'm not encouraging them. I'm just trying to get them to think through this if they're having one standard serving size. Kids, take a second, right? Like, think about it. Nope. That is 10 milligrams, right? Which is double the serving size. Half of the 1 square of chocolate, right? And usually, I know I'm guilty of eating a whole chocolate bar. Guilty, not guilty. I enjoy eating a whole chocolate bar, right? The students, when they really think about this, their eyes light up, right? I think even some adults, when they see this, they're like, oh my gosh, I can see how it would be so easy to to underestimate how strong one of these products could be. So again, this presents a whole different risk to young people, right? Where they, even if it's a first time use, right? We're not talking about long-term risk. We're talking about them having a really uncomfortable experience that could be, something, tragic could happen, or like they could put themselves in danger, right? If they're not understanding the potency of these products and the potential for overdose with edibles. Okay. So you can walk away with anything today from this video, it's that I really want y'all to understand that today's cannabis has evolved to be a completely different drug. When we're talking to young people about this substance, it's important that we highlight, hey, what's happening, what you are seeing in the media on TikTok or on Instagram, right? Or maybe hearing from a friend, is that it's just weed. And what we're seeing is that society's perception, because legalization is becoming more common, we're seeing people perceive the risk of cannabis go down, when in actuality, over the past 10 years, this drug has become more risky than it's ever been. And helping young people and adults understand that is a crucial part of effective prevention. Again, I'm not going to read everything off this slide. But I will say, coming from the social norms approach of prevention, letting them know that they're making the choice not to use cannabis, that they're fitting in with the majority of their peers, that they can overdose on cannabis, and that there is a major difference between consuming an edible versus inhaling cannabis. All right. So thank you so much for your time, for watching. If you all would love to schedule a free consult to learn more about Prevention Ed and what we can do for your community when it comes to boosting your existing social emotional programming, please email me at katie@preventioned.org. I wish you all a happy and healthy school year and a restful summer. Thank you for all the work that you do with for your students. And we hope to hear from you soon at Prevention Ed. Thank you so much. Take care.